Senator Rapert, please join us. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this important step in the process of working on our levee systems in Arkansas. I'm delighted to be joined by Secretary Jamie Cook, who served as chairman of the Levee Task Force. The vice chairman was Director A.J. Gary, who is not here today, but there's various members of the task force that have joined us. I particularly want to recognize Senator Rapert, who is here, Senator Stubblefield, Representative Hillman, and Representative Bentley were all our legislative members of the task force. The Corps of Engineers played a very important role in guiding and providing technical information. I also see the St. Francis Levee Board here that is one of the models of proper conduct of a levee system. Rob, thank you for your leadership and participation in the Levee Task Force. I also wanted to recognize the Arkansas Association of Counties, who's done a great job of participating as well. And with that, I want to particularly thank Secretary Cook for her leadership on this, her hard work on this, and I wanted to turn the microphone over to her at this time for comments and a presentation.
Thank you, Governor. On July 12th, we launched the Arkansas Levee Task Force and had our first meeting and kind of organized, and that seems like forever ago, but it really did pass very quickly. When you assemble 26 people with one common goal and 4 objectives of a proclamation, it's a little overwhelming, but this team was remarkable. We united instantly, and we broke out into 4 groups and worked very hard since July to come up with a report that is usable, comprehensive. The county judges or the boards can pick this thing up and use it. And so that's what we wanted. We wanted a comprehensive report that could be used by anybody that picked it up. And so that's what we feel like we've done. And so with that, Governor Hutchinson, I'm very, very pleased to present to you the Arkansas Levee Task Force final report.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done, Jamie. Thank you, Jamie, again for your leadership, but all the committee members that have worked so hard for this result. And I wanted to make a couple of comments in regard to the report. First of all, let's put it in historic perspective. Last year, of course, I will never forget that call from the Tulsa district of the Corps of Engineers. In a very bright, sunshiny day in Arkansas, he calls and informs me that in a matter of days, there will be a record amount of water that will be released from Oklahoma into the Arkansas River. And he said, you need to prepare for a mandatory evacuation because you'll reach flood stages that you've never seen before. This will wake anyone up. Following that, the water came. I was on a helicopter going from Little Rock over to Fort Smith, surveying the levee system, the flooding, and what caught your attention is the critical, essential role that our levee system plays in protecting our agriculture, our homes, and our property. But it also made you realize some weaknesses in the system. And thirdly, they're not just weaknesses in particular levees themselves, but as weaknesses in our oversight of our levee system. And for that reason, I convened this task force, 26 members, and I asked the task force to look at 4 areas: to analyze the current conditions of our levees in Arkansas, to identify funding needs and sources, to review the monitoring and reporting systems that we have from our local levee districts to the state and to our county judges and county officials, and finally to review the adequacy of our current laws. The result of the work of the task force, which they went to the levees, they did personal work on this, they convened and broke into subcommittees, and they came up with 17 recommendations. I'll let you peruse the 17 recommendations, but all of these are worthy of note, worthy of study, worthy of action, and at the different levels of government. My initial conclusions from the report are, first of all, that the report is thorough, it is thoughtful, and we need to pay attention to the recommendations. Secondly, I believe the recommendations has the right balance. They could have come in and said, well, this is a federal government responsibility. They could have come in and said it's a state, or it's simply the levee districts. They achieve the right balance in terms of federal, state, and local responsibility for the proper maintenance and strength and oversight of our levee system in Arkansas. Now let me talk about some of the specific recommendations, and I just picked out a couple of the 17 that I thought were noteworthy. One of the recommendations is that we need an inventory of all of our river systems that have levees. Because of the time constraints and because of the urgency of what we saw in the Arkansas River, the focus was doing an inventory, and they completed a full inventory of the levees along the Arkansas River. This is a humongous task, but it was recognized that we need to have that same type of inventory and visibility and recognition of the challenges of the levees along the White River, along the Red River, and the other rivers in Arkansas that has had flooding experience but also has a levee system. And so we want to accomplish that, and we've already have that as an action item to follow up with an inventory of the levee systems along the other river systems in our state. They recommended that the GIS, Geologic Information Systems, Department of Arkansas government, that GIS continues to provide support to our local levee districts. This is some technical support, it's visibility, it's geographic support, and we certainly accept that. A second specific recommendation is that the levee districts that are dependent upon each other should look at consolidation. So where you might have two levee district boards in one system that protects a portion of the river, should they be consolidated? We've already seen some consolidation simply since the last flooding of this last year. It made sense and they consolidated. They emphasize that the decision for consolidation should not be mandated from the state, but it should be made at the local level. The third, but I expect that to be taken very seriously, and already has by our local levee boards. The third recommendation deals with improved oversight. For example, we should have a standardized levee report that our levee boards have to submit that is not just a report that they make up as to what they think is necessary, but it's a standardized report that would have all the information for each of the levee districts that would be called upon to make those reports. And secondly, that as part of the improved oversight, that when a report is submitted, we require the emergency manager of the county and the county judge to sign off on the report, showing that if there's any structural deficiencies, they then become aware of it and have a responsibility to address it and an awareness of it. And so that improved oversight are very important recommendations that have been made. The fourth one has to do with funding. And the recommendation, if there is any state funding, that it be in the form of incentive grants to the levee districts so that they would be participating in the funding through their own assessments. But we can also assure through the state grant program that they're bringing it up to a Corps of Engineers standard so that the Corps of Engineers will have maintenance responsibility or repair responsibilities in the event of a breach. This is important for a long-term maintenance and and significance of our levee system in Arkansas. I'm here today to tell you that I support that type of incentive grant program. And I'll look forward to working with members of the General Assembly to determine what is the right amount of that grant program, to win their support for it. The reason I believe it is important is that this allows us to partner with our local levee districts to make sure they're going in the right direction in terms of the quality of their maintenance, inspections, and meeting the Corps of Engineers standards. And as part of that, we can't put a dollar figure on that because I've asked Secretary Cook to do more work in determining what's the need out there. And as we get that information, we'll work with the legislature to determine the exact amount. So again, thank you, Secretary Cook and members of the committee for their diligent work on this, the task force, and with that, the formal work of the task force is completed. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Aside from the grants, I guess, is there anything that you see would need to be taken care of legislatively, either in the fiscal session this year or possibly a special session?
I see this as a general session issue in terms of any legislation. I think what they will have to look at is how formal they want to make the levy report, what kind of information should be in that. Also in terms of the grant program and as to how that would be incentivized. Would be part of any legislative initiative, and any specifics on the improved oversight. Those are areas that were left open. Secretary Cook, do you have any further comment there? Or Senator?
We identified a few small things right off the bat that we need to look at, like the date of the reports. When do they have to be submitted? I think County Judge Jeff Phillips and the legislators talked about that. So there's some very small tweaks in the current law that we have that needs to be fixed. But I believe that the legislative group decided really to watch what's going to happen over the next year and a half as these recommendations are implemented, to see if there's additional legislative changes that need to be made. So we're going to work real hard in the next year and a half to get the recommendations implemented, and any legislative needs that arise through those recommendations being implemented, they will take it upon themselves to get that taken care of in the next General Assembly.
So does that include, so the grant program would not be set up during this year's session?
We'll have to take a look at that. I would need to look at, Director Holland is here. ANRC might have some capacity to utilize that with economic development, because we already have mitigation grant programs that are set up. And so it's possible, if there's a need, that we could, with the permission of the Legislative Council, move some money into those existing mitigation funds and grant programs under a structure that's already there. I think we've got to do a little bit more work on that. That's what I've asked Secretary Cook to get back with me on, as to what's the need out there, and also to look at what the structure is. We'll be working closely with the legislature and to see if there's a additional need in terms of legislation. I know that they'll want to take an independent look at that to see if it has to be more formalized, but there are some steps that we can take in the interim as the need might be there.
Was there any conversation with the Army Corps of Engineers during this process, and if so, what was that conversation?
Well, absolutely. They were a very critical part of that, and you might note that one of the recommendations of the task force is to make sure that the priorities of the Corps of Engineers on the lakes in Oklahoma are not just in terms of recreation, but they also recognize the priority of flood control. And it's a good reminder to the Corps. So that's a communication from the task force to the Corps of Engineers, but they were a very active participant in every meeting, and the information they shared has been a very good partnership with them.
Governor, my understanding was that in some of the levee districts, the local revenue base was such that it was almost impossible for them, or so some of them posited, for them to make any
Well, you know, here again, the levee districts have the authority and responsibility to levy assessments for the maintenance and repairs necessary for the levees. Now, some of the levees are in poor areas. They don't have sufficient landowners where the assessments are not anywhere adequate or sufficient, and that's where they need to look at should they be merged into a larger levee district that protects the whole system. So they've got to look at a consolidation if there's inadequate financial support. Secondly, that's one of the reasons for the partnership with the state, that we can incentivize that, we can support that. As to the exact formula, we'll just have to work through that. You want to?
Yeah, I'll echo what the governor said. Right now, we're working real closely with the office, Shelby Johnson's office, with the GIS to make sure that the assessments that are being collected are accurate, to make sure that there's not a need to reassess all that. But in the interim, you know, like the governor said, a lot of times they're just going to need to consolidate, and that will remedy that issue.
Who would be responsible for the inventory of the levees across other river systems? And would that be something that would be accomplished fairly quickly with the consistent staff and committee?
Well, we're the St. Francis Levee District, and Rob here has been very instrumental in helping us to take the inventory of the levee systems along the Arkansas River. And so we're going to be have discussions with them as to whether they can expand their support for us in looking at the other levee systems. Rob, do you want to make a comment on that?
Thank you. The St. Francis Levee District, and I appreciate the appointment, sir, to this task force. And I'm thankful for the task force report because it gives the local people the opportunity to step up and protect themselves through their levee systems. The St. Francis Levee District wants to further that throughout the state as guided by the governor's office. We look forward to that partnership. And so we're exploring those options as to what that might look like for the further inventory in the state and other basins.
Governor or anybody on the panel, is there a critical part that there's a spot in the levee system that doesn't have an incorporated board that you want to prioritize and get a board there or consolidate them? And we made a list of those spots that you want to get to first.
I'll first, in a moment, let Secretary Cook answer that in more detail. But the first thing we did was to put $10 million with the approval of the General Assembly into to the immediate repair of our levees. And so everyone will remember the 2019 flood and the levee that breached, and we've had the money to help in the assist in repair of those levees. So that was the immediate need where the breaches were. As a result of that, we've seen some consolidation of the districts to strengthen them. Jamie, do you have any more that need to be immediately addressed?
No, we didn't make a priority list. I think that is, you know, subjective at best, and as to what those priorities are. The county judges have all been working real hard together with the Association of Counties to prioritize those projects. We'll say that the $10 million that we're going to award soon, January 16th, I think, with ANRC, certainly would give us a better idea of what those priorities are. But we're really glad to be able to get that money out there and to get those levees fixed. Are there more problems following the distribution of that money? Absolutely, but that's what this report's for, is to give guidance on how we can fix all of those.
Is there a dollar amount of how much that money would go to fixing the Dardanelle levee? 'Cause that's, I mean, 40-foot hole.
We've already gone through that. haven't we? Come up with the microphone.
That's one of the grants that we're considering at the 16th meeting next week. Across the state, a lot of the levee districts applied for some grant money, and so that's kind of our priority list as we go right now.
We don't remember the amount they asked for.
I think it was around 1.7 million, but I know that there's the work that's going on there right now repairing the highway, that work might lessen the amount that they're going to need there.
All right, with that, we'll be available for any comments. I want to thank again Senator Raper for his participation, and he will be available as well if you have anything to follow up. Thank you again, Secretary Cook and members, Judge, for everyone who's done such great work. And let me emphasize that I believe this is one of the good things that came out of a terrible circumstance with the 2019 flood, that we've been able to focus on this in what I believe will be a lasting impact for the state of Arkansas in a positive way in strengthening our levee system in this state. Thank you. All right. Hey, good job. Yeah.